World War II. It's the biggest, deadliest conflict in human history, a total catastrophe that changed everything. But it didn't just pop up out of nowhere. It was more like a chain reaction, right? A line of dominoes, each one knocking over the next. So in this explainer, we're going to trace it all the way back. Let's find that very first domino that got pushed. Okay, so that first domino, it was actually set up right at the end of the First World War. And it all comes down to one single powerful German word, Diktat. It literally means an imposed peace. And that word, it just perfectly captures the deep, simmering anger that was building in Germany. You have to understand, this wasn't a peace treaty they agreed to. It was an order they were forced to accept. So let's talk about that peace. A peace built on sand. It sounds poetic, but it's tragically accurate. The groundwork for the next World War was literally laid in the very treaty that was supposed to guarantee peace forever. Talk about shaky foundations. This thing was just waiting to fall apart. And that shaky foundation was the Treaty of Versailles. I mean, look at these terms. This wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a national humiliation for Germany. First, they were forced to take all the blame for World War I. All of it. Then they were hit with absolutely crippling repair bills. They lost huge chunks of territory, and their army slashed down to just 100,000 troops. You put all that together, and what do you get? A perfect storm of anger and resentment. It created the perfect breeding ground for extreme nationalism, and for a guy like Adolf Hitler to come along and promise to make Germany proud again. Now you have to remember, the memory of World War I was still a fresh, horrific wound for countries like Britain and France. They were desperate to avoid another war at all costs. And that desperation led to this policy, appeasement. The idea was, well, kind of simple on the surface. Let's just give Hitler some of the things he's demanding. Maybe, just maybe, he'll be satisfied and stop there. It was a huge gamble, really, a bet born completely out of fear. Well, that gamble, it failed. Big time. Hitler didn't see appeasement as a generous offer of peace. He saw it as weakness, pure and simple. So he started pushing. In 1936, he sends troops back into the Rhineland, a direct violation of the treaty. What happens? Nothing. Then, in 1938, he just annexes Austria. Again, crickets. The Allies even handed him a piece of Czechoslovakia at the Munich conference, hoping that would be the end of it. But each time they gave in, it just made him bolder. Until finally, 1939, he invades Poland. And that was the final straw. The last domino fell. The war was on. So now we're in it. The Axis Lightning War. And you gotta understand, this war did not start slowly. There was no grinding stalemate like in World War I. Nope. This started with a terrifyingly fast, new kind of warfare that gave the Axis powers these unbelievable, shocking victories right out of the gate. This new strategy had a name, Blitzkrieg, Lightning War. And that's exactly what it was. The idea was to use overwhelming, fast-moving force, tanks, planes, all concentrated in one spot, to just punch a hole right through the enemy lines and create total chaos behind them. And man, was it effective. Poland, gone in a few weeks. By the summer of 1940, Denmark, Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands, even mighty France had fallen. All of a sudden, Britain was the only one left standing against them. So the lines were drawn pretty quickly. You had two main teams. In one corner, the Axis powers, Germany, Italy, and Japan. And in the other, the Allies, which at this point was basically just the United Kingdom and what was left of France. But look closely at this list. Notice who isn't really in the fight yet? The two sleeping giants, the Soviet Union and the United States. When they finally get dragged in, the whole game is going to change. Right, the world at war. Because in 1941, everything got bigger. Two absolutely massive events happened that year that took this from being a war in Europe to a genuine, full-blown world war. First up, June 1941. Hitler makes what is maybe one of the biggest strategic blunders in history. He had this non-aggression pact with Stalin's Soviet Union, right? Well, he tears it up and launches Operation Barbarossa, a gigantic invasion of Russia. This decision opens up the Eastern Front, a vast, brutal, and bloody theater of war that would just swallow up millions of soldiers and endless resources. Then, just 6 months later, halfway across the world, December 7th, 1941, Japan launches a devastating surprise attack on the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor. In a single morning, America's desire to stay out of the war, its policy of isolationism, was just shattered. The United States declared war, and that was it. The conflict was now officially global, with fighting in Europe, Africa, Asia, and across the Pacific Ocean. Okay, so for the first few years, the Axis powers looked like an unstoppable juggernaut. It really seemed like they might win. But then the tide began to turn. Starting in late 1942, a handful of crucial battles finally stopped the Axis advance dead in its tracks and started pushing them back. And this happened all over the world, not just in one place. You had the Battle of Midway in the Pacific, where the US Navy absolutely crippled the Japanese fleet and stopped their eastward expansion. Then in North Africa, at the Battle of El Alamein, the British finally defeated the Germans and secured the vital Suez Canal. But the big one, the one that really changed everything, was the Battle of Stalingrad on the Eastern Front. It was one of the deadliest battles in all of history, and it was Germany's first massive defeat on land, a catastrophic blow they truly never recovered from. So now the Axis is on the back foot, they're reeling, and the Allies decide it's time for the final push. June 6, 1944. D-Day, the largest seaborne invasion in the history of the world, hits the beaches of Normandy in France. This finally opens up that crucial Western front everyone had been waiting for. It was the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany, now being squeezed from Russia in the east and the Allied forces in the west. The world after. Because the end of the war, when it came, was just as brutal as the beginning. And the world it left behind? It was almost unrecognizable compared to the world of just 6 years before. In Europe, the collapse was fast. The Soviets were closing in on Berlin. On April 30th, 1945, Hitler committed suicide in his bunker. Just a few days later, on May 8th, Germany surrendered. VE Day. But the war wasn't over. Japan was still fighting fiercely in the Pacific. So in August, the United States made a decision that would change the world forever. It used a terrifying new weapon, the atomic bomb, on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That unimaginable destruction forced Japan's surrender. VJ Day. And just like that, the world was violently pushed into the nuclear age. So what was the final cost of all this? The number, it's just staggering. It's almost impossible to really wrap your head around it. Somewhere between 70 and 85 million people died. Soldiers, civilians, men, women, children. It is without a doubt the single deadliest conflict our species has ever seen. And the end of the war wasn't just about stopping the fighting. It was about the death of an entire world order. Before the war, you had these dominant European empires. After, they were shattered. And in their place, two new superpowers emerged, the USA and the USSR. The old, failed League of Nations was replaced by the United Nations. Imperialism gave way to a new era of decolonization, and conventional warfare was overshadowed by the terrifying new reality of the nuclear age. A whole new global chessboard was set up, all ready for the next great conflict, the Cold War. So, yeah, the world of 1945 is long gone. But the war created the institutions, the alliances, the technologies that still shape our lives every single day. Which leaves us with one last big question to think about. Are we, you and me, right now, still living in the shadow of its consequences?